Sometimes what we want is comfort, but what we really need is some courage. Sometimes we want sympathy, but what we're really missing is strength. Sometimes we just want somebody to feel sorry for us, but what we need is somebody that will challenge us. So when you grow weary and when you're tired and worn out, you might want the coach to tell you, hey, why don't you come sit on the bench and take a drink? You've worked hard, that's enough for the day. But maybe what we really need is a coach to say, suck it up, get in the game, finish this thing, you've got this. And so for preparation of challenges that lie ahead, a good coach will prepare you. A coach will say things like, you gotta be willing to hit the gym, you gotta train harder, rep it out, get in the weight room. And so there's some of this language in Hebrews 12, 1 through 3. The author is challenging believers, don't give up. He first reminds the reader that they are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses to whom they should listen. And the faith and the faithfulness of what we call the Hall of Fame in Hebrews 11 gives us a confidence to keep believing and a courage to keep going. The next thing the Hebrew writer says to those who are growing weary and to those who might be losing heart, verse 1, let us throw off everything that hinders and let us throw off the sin that so easily entangles. Now this phrase, throw off, it means to lay something down beyond reach, where you can't get to it again. So the writer is speaking to people who are tired and worn out, and he wants them to identify the weight that they've been carrying and then to set it down and kick it away. When we identify what's tripping us up or slowing us down, it allows us to move forward. But it's not always easy to identify the weight, especially if we've been carrying it for a long time. But this is not just a suggestion. This is a direct charge to use all of your strength, whether physical or emotional, and to push it away. So the challenge then is to identify these things in your life that are weighing you down and don't keep carrying them. Do something about it. So two things specifically we should identify: everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles.
You know, I was probably an abnormally focused kid. When I got to Tennessee, boy, I really set my sights to a whole new level of focus and dedication through Dave Tegular and the beautiful people of Athletes in Action. And I went to my first Bible study. And so I was balancing this tunnel vision of trying to achieve this worldly goal with who am I? What was I made for? What am I called to do outside the realm of fighting for this big goal in the game of baseball? And by the time we were juniors, we went to the College World Series and we finished third in the College World Series. I got drafted in the first round, and it was kind of this whirlwind of a bunch of dreams coming true at once. But my start in the minor leagues didn't get off to a great start, my first full season especially. But then I found my way and started performing at a high level. But really 2005 is where my career began. I made the team out of camp, had an okay rookie year, but had a monster postseason and hit a home run to finish a game which won us a playoff series. At that point, I thought my career was just starting. I thought, you know, I'd play in a bunch of these and have another couple dozen big moments in my playoff career, and turned out that was it. And at that point, the game had started to become unfulfilling to me. I really started to question my motivation to play, and I was kind of at a crossroads at that point.
Athletes, of course, will use weight for training purposes to build strength and endurance, but no athlete would ever compete with carrying extra weight. They want to get rid of it so they'll be free and strong and light. That's especially true if you're a runner. Runners today try to avoid any kind of extra weight. I read one study that showed for every extra pound, it adds 1.4 seconds to every mile. So running shoes are rigorously tested to make sure they're as light as possible, but can still get the job done. Casual joggers, we don't have to worry about that stuff, right? We carry our phones, our water bottles, it's fine. But a dedicated runner will throw off everything that slows them down. If they're really serious, they'll cut their hair, they'll even weigh their shoelaces because they know that every ounce adds up and every ounce hinders. So that word hinders here, it's actually a noun that means any kind of weight. The New Living Translation puts it this way, verse 1, let us strip off every weight that slows us down. There are some common weights that most of us struggle with, that most of us find ourselves carrying. Weights like the lies we tell, the people we envy, the things we covet, our shame about the past, our anxiousness about the future. Those things can hold us back. Even the lack of faith or unbelief or religious rules can all be hindrances to keep us from the race God has called us to run. So all these weights, they're not the same for everyone, but there are some dead weight that a lot of us struggle with, and maybe we have been for a long time. A weight that doesn't even weigh very much. If you carry it long enough, it can reach a point where you just can't keep going, and that's when you tend to give up.
So in 2009, my wife was pregnant with our second child. You know, in utero, we found out he had a lot of problems, and so it was a really trying time. We didn't exactly know what we were in for, but they knew through a 4D ultrasound that he had a problem with his gut. They didn't know what it was exactly, but summer 2009, I'm off playing, and my wife's in this high-risk pregnancy, and we already have a child. Boy, it was rough. You know, going to the field, I would get ill. I didn't want to do it, so I was working through all that and really leaning on God. And she has our son, and you talk about hitting your knees, man. I know for me, the turning point was when I just said, God, if he's yours, he's yours. If he's ours, we'll serve you well with it. You know, I just was at that point where I was trusting God with whether he was going to make it or not. And sure enough, gut started working. We started feeding him, and he made it. You know, the perseverance of a life of professional sports and leaning on God through the ugliness of my career and how it had taken turns that I didn't see, and finding joy in the trials of feeling like you're not fulfilling the promise that you thought you had in a public arena like professional sports, I think prepared me well for that trial. And so I think a lot of that prepared us for that season of just being desperate for God to show up in Jackson's life.
As much as any weight that we carry, I think anxiety can be one that we all struggle with, and it can be debilitating. It can feel crushing to the point where you're just not sure if you can take another step. Now, while all of us may struggle with anxiety to some degree, it can be crushing for some and maybe just annoying for others. I know some of you might have a diagnosed anxiety disorder, and for you, anxiety is more than just a spiritual issue. A friend of mine who helps people with anxiety says that sometimes we are praying for restored hearts when what we should be praying for is restored serotonin levels. I agree with that. Now, there are others of you who struggle with anxiety because you can't stop thinking about everything you need to get done, or maybe your commute has gotten a little bit long and is stressing you out, or maybe it's the family that's coming over the holidays. Family issues can cause anxiety too. But wherever you are on the anxiety spectrum, I believe God wants to take that weight that you've been carrying. So if you could learn to hand it over to Him, I think it would change the way that you are running the race that's been marked out for you. Throughout the New Testament, as the new Christian community grew, followers of Jesus, just like today, were struggling with anxiety then. They were stressed out and feeling overwhelmed. One of the disciples of Jesus, Peter, wrote to a group of Christians who were struggling under anxiety because they were being persecuted by the Emperor Nero. And Peter begins his letter to these Christians by addressing them as God's elect, as exiles that have been scattered throughout. They have been driven from their homes. They have been living as refugees. They've lost their jobs. Their possessions have been seized. And they have a lot of weight that they've been asked to carry as they run this race, a lot of anxiety. And here's what Peter says to them. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. It says, "Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you." Oh, okay, so that's it then, Peter? We just cast it on God and problem solved? Hey, everybody, Peter figured it out. This is what you do. You just push this button and all your anxiety goes away. I mean, I'll admit that if you struggle with anxiety, what we read here seems simplistic at best, maybe even a little bit offensive, depending on what kind of weight you're carrying. If someone says to you, this is all you do, just cast your anxieties up on God, and it feels a little bit too easy. And yet, as you study this passage of Scripture, what you'll find is the word cast is not the word of like a fisherman, of casting and then bringing it back to you. It's this idea of transferring weight. It's not that you just let it go into thin air and it stops being a problem, but you now are saying, God, you carry something that I can't carry. So if you really believed that God cared for you, how would you feel about this verse? I mean, it says cast your anxiety on him because he cares for you. If he really cares for you, I mean, whether or not you believe it changes whether or not this verse is possible. So that's the challenge, is to identify what's causing us anxiety and then to intentionally transfer that weight over to God and let him carry it because he cares for you.
To me, sometimes in life and in whatever we're chasing after, the world may tell you that you need to add to achieve. You do this, go after this, learn that, and what I've found is that often it's the opposite, that like Kyle says, you need to throw off the weight. You actually need subtraction sometimes is a much more beneficial step than addition. And as a player, I tell young athletes this all the time. If you want your goals in this sport, much more likely that you need to get rid of certain things than to add certain things. You need to say no to certain temptations, to certain lifestyle choices, maybe certain relationships, so that you can focus on what it is that you choose to desire. I think the season of going through my son's medical situation, the beauty of that, when God puts you in that, is nothing else matters. You do throw off everything else because all that matters is literally the life of your child. And so you throw off these things because you're singularly focused on being dependent on what God has for you in that situation. And that's a lesson learned now as I move into, my business and my broadcasting career, and as a parent and husband, and now coaching youth sports, like that idea and that message of throwing off the weight, whether that's the weight of guilt, the weight of expectations, the weight of some of the shiny and glittery things of this world, like just getting rid of that and focusing on what matters, what God has called you to. To me, there's so much wisdom in that and freedom in that. And he wants to take our weight off of our shoulders, so that the wisdom of that Hebrews verse is so applicable to me in all those seasons of my life. But right now as a parent, where I'm really trying to be focused on this season of my life and be intentional with my kids in the home, because I know that won't last forever.
So what anxieties have you been carrying that you need to transfer over to God? For most of us, what makes us anxious are people or situations that we don't have any control over. So for me, recently, that would look like teaching my youngest teenage daughter how to drive. That was very anxiety-inducing, right? Because I felt vulnerable and I didn't feel like I had any power. And she did pretty good most of the time. Once in a while, she would get her lefts and rights mixed up, which is, terrifying, actually. And I would be in the passenger seat and I would have a death grip on the dashboard and I would slam on brakes that don't exist. Why? Because I wasn't in control. So what's an area like that in your life where you feel anxious because you don't have control? Maybe it's a relationship, or maybe it's like finances, and there's some things about your finances that you can control, but there's some things you can't. And Peter says, cast your anxiety on the Lord, but how do we do that? Well, the verse before, verse 6 of 1 Peter 5, gives us a clue. It says, humble yourselves before the Lord under God's mighty hand, so he will lift you up in due time. And then Peter says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. So let's unpack that for a minute. One way pride leads to anxiety is pride makes me self-centered. And the more self-centered I am, the more I'm concerned about my own pleasure, my own comfort, my own desires. And the more I focus on those things and how I don't have those things, the more anxious I'm going to feel. Pride refuses to ask for help. And so much of the anxiety that we deal with in our life comes because we refuse to humble ourselves and ask God or ask someone else for help. We insist on carrying the weight on our own, and it creates anxiety. And pride also has control issues. As mentioned before, anxiety comes when we face things that are uncontrollable, and pride demands that I have control of a situation, and pride keeps us from humbling ourselves and surrendering things to God that we can't control. So look, God cares for you. He loves you. He sees you in your struggle. He sees you in your brokenness. He understands what you're going through. And when He sees you, He is moved with tenderness and compassion. His desire as a father is for you to not bear this weight alone. He wants to take it from you. He wants you to be unhindered. He wants you to be free. So what weight do you need to transfer over to God? Cast your anxiety on Him. He cares for you. Hebrews 12 challenges us to throw that weight off, everything that hinders, so that we can run the race the way we were designed to run the race. And there are a lot of different kinds of weights. We've talked about one for the most part, anxiety. But whatever you're carrying, whatever it is, just know that Jesus can set you free from what is weighing you down. If you imagine a child who's struggling to carry a heavy suitcase, the father sees the child struggling and says, "Can I carry that for you?" The child can continue to struggle and continue to carry the weight, or the child can say to the father, "Would you carry the weight for me?" Maybe that's a conversation you need to have with God. He would love to take that weight off your shoulders so that you can be free to run your race with all of the strength that you have.